You're listening to Our People, Our Story, a Sioux Falls Connected podcast. Our guest today, William H. Pay. Before we get to William, I want to say hello to Garrett Gross. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to have the guest that we have today.
Yeah.
I've developed a friendship with Bill. Bill Pay is our guest today. I'm trying to think to myself how we met several years ago. I don't know if it was through the Minnehaha County Historical Society or how we crossed paths, but I wanted to meet Bill because I think a lot of people listening that when they see Bill's photography around Sioux Falls, they will recognize it, but not necessarily know who's the person that took these photographs. Yeah. If you go to like a Grill 26 right there by the VA, or the Phillips Diner downtown, or Tinner's, or Bagel Boy, they have some of Bill's images in their places of business.
Many of those. I didn't know that those were yours, but beautiful work.
I know when I see Bill's work, I can tell it's his, right? Just because the quality of the image that's been taken, the way that the perspective, there's just something about Bill's work that, and he'll talk about it a little bit, the way he saved his images were kind of an accident, but over time, it proven to be the best way to save his images. And we're excited to have Bill here today because his experience growing up in Sioux Falls and then his career in the photography business is just kind of a cool background that I think people are going to enjoy, and appreciate you having on the podcast today, Bill.
Well, let me start the thing by telling you how I ever got into the photographic business.
Yeah.
I was going to Washington High School and looking for a part-time job after school. And the guy said, well, you can go over here at the bakery, the Golden Rule Bakery. They're looking for a guy to fry donuts. So I gave that a whirl for 2 weeks, frying donuts after school. And then another friend of mine said I was a little tired of taking home donuts. And anyway, another guy told me that they were looking for, so to speak, a flunky at Hanson's studio. It was a portrait studio here in Sioux Falls on Phillips Avenue downtown on the second floor in the building. The gentleman that was the photographer, his name was Emil Hansen. He was the father of the two fellows that started Harold's Photography, Harold Hansen and Howard Hansen.
Oh, wow.
Well, anyway, I worked for Emil Hansen after school, wrapping packages and putting pictures in folders and going out on jobs with him. I had a basic knowledge of photography because it was kind of a hobby. And so I had kind of knew what was going on. But I'd go out on jobs with Mr. Hansen and hold all the equipment and hold the extra lights and so forth. Well, I got to the point where he would had confidence in me for some reason or other, and let me go out on some of the jobs by myself.
Yeah.
Well, he had a contract with the Argus Leader. This was during World War II. The Argus Leader did not have any photographer at that time, so Emil Hansen was taking all their pictures. And, of course, I was doing this and that and everything else and going to high school at the same time. Well, I found great delight because they'd call me out of school, out of class, to go take pictures.
Nice.
All my friends thought I was pretty nifty then.
So this is in the early 40s. You got your career. You got some experience.
Yep, and that was it. And I worked for him for till I graduated from high school in 1945. And then I went to work for his son, Harold Hansen, at Harold's Photography, which was up by the State Theater, part-time as I was going to the University of South Dakota, and also a photographer down there. So I was pretty in-depth into the photography. I was up to my neck in it. And anyway, then I was not taking pictures for Harold's. I was working on the sales floor selling photo equipment. Well, I kind of got a little antsy, and I thought I ought to be independent, so I opened my own operation in 1953 out on South Minnesota Avenue at about 30th Street, where Anderson Flower Shop, and I think they call it the Southway Shopping Center.
Kind of where Boss's Pizza is now, is where your shop was located?
Yes. Well, just a little bit, about 2 doors south of that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And that was 1953, and I had retail camera store selling all kinds of photo equipment and film processing. And still doing commercial photography, taking pictures, and that's how I really got into it as far as taking pictures around town. Actually, it was just about the only game in town because when we first started, there weren't nobody else taking this type of pictures.
So your career basically professionally started in 1953, and you're still actively taking pictures.
Well, I started, I was getting paid to take pictures when I worked for Emil Hansen.
In the early 40s?
I kind of figured out that I'd like to have somebody prove any different, but I think I'm the oldest continually operating photographer in the state.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit. You've got just a huge portfolio of great images of Sioux Falls dating back to the early 50s, as we've discussed, which we'll talk about here in a couple minutes. But your experience of growing up in Sioux Falls, your family's roots go pretty deep here in Sioux Falls, and you grew up, went to Washington High School, and where did you grow up? What neighborhood did you live in as a kid?
Well, originally, when I was just a little kid, up to about 5 years old, I lived over on South Main Avenue, just south of what was All Saints School, about 2 blocks. And then my father purchased a house over on South 4th Avenue by McKinnon Park. And that's actually where I did all my growing up, I guess.
So when you were a kid, was McKinnon Park the place to hang out like it is now? Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Played catch over there with my brothers, and they had a wading pool over there, which what you'd call swimming, but you didn't know any swimming. And I spent a lot of time in McKinnon Park. In fact, when I was really in grade school, I sold popcorn at the band concerts, and that was kind of fun. Band concerts were a Sunday afternoon, and the guy that had the concession stand there sold pop and ice cream cones and popcorn, and so I'd get a box and load her up with popcorn sacks and go to the band concert and sell popcorn. I think of it well as a nickel, and I think you could get a big sack for a dime or something like that.
I think the people that live around McKinnon Park today love that neighborhood feel and that feel of community, and they all kind of gather around the park, whether it's 2018 or 1945. It's a similar feel and similar neighborhood experience.
Oh, yeah, I can walk through there with an eye shut and know where to duck the trees.
How different is that neighborhood now compared to then? Are there
pretty
many
much
changes?
The same thing.
So it's
there's a sidewalk over there that I could point out to you. That's the company that made the sidewalk has put their stamp on it, 1917, and that sidewalk's still in existence.
Nice.
I'd like to see some sidewalks now that they put up that last that long.
102 years so far. Yeah, probably not going to see that nowadays.
Yeah.
One of the things that you and I have discussed in the past is that McKinnon Park neighborhood we're talking about, obviously, but to the south, kind of that Pendar Lane area, that wasn't developed as fast. And there's some people that actually used to hunt ducks in the sloughs down there, right? No,
I didn't do anything like that, but in the spring, all the snow melt would all gather there and it'd flood. And a friend of mine, a kid that I used to go around with, he was a big duck hunter, but he didn't duck. He couldn't. That was in the city, but he had a duck boat and he'd go paddling around down there.
Pender Lane area.
Yeah, right down. He lived on 29th and Pender Lane.
Yeah, the experience that you had growing up when it comes to, just different things that kept you busy. What else would a kid do? Going to the movies and doing different things to just keep yourself busy. What would a 10-year-old kid do in the Sioux Falls area?
Well, of course, there wasn't such a thing as television. You would go ride my bike, big on riding my bike, and go to movies on Saturday afternoon, and play in summertime and play ball over McKinnon Park. Wintertime we used to go ice skating on Covell Lake, and another in the neighborhood there were a lot of empty lots then. The neighborhood wasn't built up like it is now, and there was one corner lot where the person that lived next door would bank up the snow and fill it full of water with his garden hose, and we had a skating rink there.
Oh, wow.
So was McKinnon Hospital there at the time? Was there a gap between the park and the hospital, or what was kind of?
Well, 21st Street with Boulevard was pretty well built up with houses on the way to McKinnon Hospital. And the McKinnon Hospital was a long ways away as far as I was concerned.
No, it's right blocks. There. Yeah,
right.
So you were talking about an area that would get flooded, and there would be ducks there. One of the photos that we have that I was kind of flipping through your book here, which is an amazing book. Is there a place people can get this?
Not the book. That's my only one of samples of my pictures.
Okay, well, in the book, there's a photo from June of 1957, and it's a flood of 41st Street and Louise, which is the busiest intersection in the state right now. And back then, it's underwater from this flood, but it doesn't look like it was a real busy intersection back then, does it?
Well, no. Then this was a rain flood, not winter snow melt.
Oh, wow.
It was a rainstorm, and it was quite a rain.
One of the things that Bill, that I can identify his photography is that in the 50s, I don't think there were a lot of people that were up in airplanes taking aerial photographs of the community. Bill was the only guy. I don't know.
How did that get started?
Well, if some guy wanted a picture of something, I'd go rent an airplane and a pilot, and away I go.
Up they went. The images, the 41st in Minnesota image that he has is just, you can see where the streets are, how these mile markers kind of developed and the grids were laid out. Another image that's very cool is 57th and Louise. Yeah, that's not one that's flooded, but you can see where 57th Street is, where Louise intersects with it, and there is nothing there but
railroad
maybe
track
a
going across
farmhouse
diagonally in the picture there.
Now, does that railroad track? Because I was looking at, I guess it's this photo that's here, which I'll hold that up to the microphone. That'll help, won't it? No, there's right here. Is this 229? Or is
there
that
wasn't such a thing as 229 then.
But that kind of looks like maybe that's the future path.
It would have gone.
229
was built in the early 60s.
Yeah.
So it would have gone right through there.
Yeah. Did you notice that this was 57th Street?
Yeah.
And the railroad tracks run across there.
Yeah.
And no, there was no sign of 229.
That wasn't even a thought yet back in 1954 when that photo was taken. We're going to have these images available somewhere that people can see them, and then at the end of the program, we'll let you know how to get a hold of Bill if you'd like to maybe look at photos or even if you want to purchase them. You have people do that quite often, don't you?
Well, I like to show them to groups and people. If they're interested in pictures, I'll be happy to show them to them. Of course, I like to sell them too, but I always learn something new. Somebody will say, well, my grandfather built that building over there and this and that and something else.
Well, I think there's several banks in town that have, 15, 20 images in their bank. And I just think it adds kind of a local nostalgia, kind of a connection. And, there's you put a lot of things on the wall of your business, and Bill's pictures just have they resonate with a lot of people. And, we've talked about this, you and I, the hundreds and hundreds of images that you've taken. You've taken pictures of famous events. You've taken images of famous people. Yeah. What are some of your images that you're really proud of that you've taken that are in your portfolio?
Well, of course, I like to reminisce about them, and then how I happened to take the pictures. But I like that Queen Bee Mill fire. I thought that was kind of a exciting looking picture.
We talked about that on the podcast before, just the history of the Queen Bee Mill. For those of you that aren't familiar, the ruins, you could call them, are just to the east of the falls today. Yeah. They're partitioned off and you can't walk through them. But that used to be was 8 or 9 story building.
Oh yeah, it was a big thing. Yeah.
And what year did that burn down?
Well, I don't know. I have to look at the picture.
I think it was like 54, 55, somewhere around there. Somebody called you and said, hey, Bill, you should go over there and take some pictures.
Well, the building's burning down.
Get over there.
I'm flipping through the book here. I'll see if I can find it. I had seen it a moment ago, but now it's flipping
I've only seen images that Bill's taken of that event happening, and, that was a...
Well, a lot of them are very important people, too, some of the pictures, and that was exciting to do that.
So when you took the picture of, like, Richard Nixon and George McGovern and Joe Foss and different people, were you commissioned for the paper, or who was out there that day?
Oh, no. Somebody else hired me to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I found the Queen Bee Mill fire, 1956, January of 56. And you can tell it's a pretty tall building in this photo. You can't tell that nowadays with what's left of it.
And I can tell you it was very cold down there when I was taking those pictures.
Yeah, even with the fire, it looks like it's chilly. You can see the snow everywhere.
I don't think there's any hope of putting out the fire.
Oh, no.
Just trying to maintain
it was well
the spread
going.
somehow.
It was on the way.
So as we flip through the book, Garrett was just mentioning some of the names. I see Ted Kennedy, and we see Richard Nixon, and many others. You had a list here a little bit ago before we started recording. You were kind of telling us some of the other notable people. So let's kind of go through some of those again.
Well, I'll just briefly go through Laura Bush took her picture, and one guy I really enjoyed taking his picture was Mark Furman, the detective with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Was he in Sioux Falls, or did you go
O.J.
there?
Simpson, yes, with the O.J. Simpson trial. And he was a very personable gentleman.
Nice.
He wanted to take his picture, he would bend over backwards for you.
Very, very nice.
He was really fun to take pictures of. And Charles Barkley, the basketball player, he was a lot of fun, too.
He's a pretty tall fella.
Yeah. And Harmon Killebrew, the baseball player from the Twins, very real gentleman. Some of these guys, they get overpaid, and they kind of don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And get out of the way. And the guy that's in the news a lot now is Rudy Giuliani. I took his picture some time ago.
Was that in Sioux Falls?
Oh,
as well?
they're all in Sioux Falls. I never left town.
So that's when they were coming here.
Yeah.
You would get the
Yeah.
opportunity
Yeah.
to see them. Nice.
Yeah. So, and there's several different people. I did a lot of them. When the State Theater had a premiere of a movie, and I can't remember the name of it, and it was a cold time in the winter too, but there were a couple movie stars here that took their pictures, and I can't remember their names at this time.
Some of the images we talked about, the Louise intersections and the 41st Street intersections, some of the other parts of Sioux Falls that are just cool to see that Bill took pictures of, whether it be Augustana College, Augustana University now, just to see how Augustana has grown, University of Sioux Falls has
campus
grown.
is full of buildings now, and they're sitting there with a lot of empty space.
Room to grow.
Yeah, downtown Sioux Falls has really changed. Some of the buildings that I have in the pictures are non-existent.
Well,
Like J.C. Penney's and Montgomery Ward's. And
as we were looking through the book here, there's a theater that is sadly a parking lot now, a parking ramp.
Yes.
But you have kind of a personal connection to the theater, don't you?
Well, yes, my grandfather started it. His name was A.K. Pay. He started a theater called the Colonial. It was on 10th Street between Phillips and Main Avenue on the north side of the street. After a while, it was a vaudeville theater called the Colonial, and then later on he thought with the talkie sound movies coming into vogue, he better update it, so he changed it, remodeled the front of it and so forth, and called it the Egyptian. A lot of people remember it by that name now.
So basically across the street from where Ming Hua was.
Yeah, across the
people
street
know
from
that
where
as a
the
landmark.
Ming Hua Cafe most recently was, to help I identify it.
There's another building downtown that's one of my favorite buildings downtown, and what was it, 2 years ago with the collapse of the Copper Lounge building, there was kind of some rumblings and concerns that as that building collapsed, that the buildings subsequent to the north might have some structural damage, and I was very happy to hear that the building that, was it your grandfather, the Beach Pay building?
Yes.
So
yeah.
right there on Phillips Avenue, that was constructed in 1887.
Yeah.
If there's another building in downtown Sioux Falls that's older than that, I'm not familiar with it.
Well, I don't know either. Maybe some of these warehouses down on North Phillips might surpass that, but I really don't know. But that Beach Pay building is still standing there, and there's been remodeled. It's pretty nice inside now.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. And that's your grandfather that was part of that as well, or
he was the pay of the Beach
gentleman?
Pay, and the other Mr. Beach was Will A. Beach. Had a printing company here in Sioux Falls.
Okay.
And the two of them were partners. Beach had 25% of the building. My grandfather had 75% of it.
So what industry was your grandfather in? Was he a developer, or what did he do?
Well, I guess he was in the theater business and the real estate. And he and some other 4 or 5 other people started the Union Savings Bank, which was in the Cataract Hotel years ago. And he was a go-getter,
an early entrepreneur in Sioux Falls.
When he first got here, he was born in Washington, Iowa.
I've been there.
Have you?
Yeah.
And then he moved to Sioux Falls, and he was a painter and a decorator, wallpaper and that kind of stuff in his early years. And then he branched out and was quite aggressive, and he did real well.
It's kind of funny just to, the oral histories of the community, and when you look back at some of the history of the community and the connections that, the people here actually have, some of these connections run pretty deep. And I'm confident that it would be your grandfather's brother was a Civil War veteran. Do I have the story right?
I'll make it easier.
Okay.
The party you're talking about was Byron Pay. He was my great uncle.
Okay.
So that would be my grandfather's brother's son.
Okay, so that's the relationship.
Yeah.
But he was like a 16-year-old kid that joined Minnesota?
Joined the Minnesota. Well, he was born in New York State, and then he came out to Blue Earth, Minnesota, and the Civil War was getting going, and he went to Fort Snelling in Minneapolis and joined at the age of 16, joined the Army. Well, they shipped him to Kentucky and then to Tennessee during the war, and down in Tennessee, his company of 15 other soldiers were sent out in search of some supplies, a supply wagon that they were looking for. Well, they found the supply wagon, but the Confederate forces were attacking it, and they were 125 men against 15. Well, Byron Pay ended up defending into the whole works and did his proper deeds to salvage and save the wagon train. And I think the casualties were 2 dead on the Confederate side and something like 15 or 20 horses. And on the northern side, the Yankees, they had just one wounded, and a mule died. A mule got shot.
A different life experience for a 16-year-old kid in the 1860s, and I just think it's a cool story that it's
well.
Tied
Then
to
he
you
went
personally.
on after, and then got out of the Civil War. Then he was in another battle someplace and was severely wounded in Georgia, and he got discharged, and he moved back to Minneapolis and worked for a fur company. And traded and sold supplies to the Sioux Indians. And then he ended up going to Oakwood, South Dakota, and built a hotel. And Lake Byron, as I understand, is named after him. Anyhow, he was buried in a cemetery in Volga, South Dakota, where he ended up living in his retired years. He was postmaster one time. For a year, the government paid him $5.49 for his year as a postmaster.
A whole year.
Yeah, and then he was U.S. Marshal, Byron Pay. Well, anyhow, 30 years after the Civil War, President McKinley awarded him the Medal of Honor for that skirmish in the Civil War, the wagon train episode.
Very nice.
And everybody's got a story, and I just think it's funny when I see Bill's pictures, the stories that he talks about of his experience taking that picture and growing up in Sioux Falls, and some of his connections to other parts of South Dakota, like he talked about Lake Byron, which is a body of water just north of Huron, which John's from Huron, and I've got some ties to the Huron area as well. He told me that. I'm like, man, it's just a small world, and some of these stories, if they're not captured or connected, they just kind of go away with like smoke in the wind. And I just think it's really cool that these images that Bill has captured tells the story of Sioux Falls. And, just a couple of the other images that he's done over the years. We talked about that original corner of 9th and Phillips in downtown Sioux Falls. Some of Bill's pictures of, like, the original First National Bank, which has been torn down and replaced.
Well, that was the original bank, but they had 2 or 3 other locations before
previous.
that. But that was the most recent one before their current location.
And the eagle that was on the roof of that location is now on the corner of 9th and Phillips.
Boy, that thing must weigh a lot of...
I'm glad they saved
big.
something from it. And,
Absolutely.
That's another image that we'll share because it just speaks to the history of downtown Sioux Falls and 9th and Phillips. And in that image, one of the buildings on the northeast corner is now being renovated into a hotel.
Right. And across the street from it was the Cataract Hotel, which is now
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo. And the cataract was the kind of the mecca for the divorcees that during the early years of the 1900s, they come out here because the waiting period was shorter.
Yeah, we talked about that in a previous show. And then 1908, they changed the laws here locally, and that industry just kind of fizzled out. But before that, the cataract was kind of the place where they stayed.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a photo here of Schoenemann's lumber from 1954, which is really interesting. You can see that. But when you look in the back, you see the Queen Bee Mill standing tall and proud in the background there. So that's really interesting.
Well, in that same image now, I have a more up-to-date picture. There's a hotel at that place now, and CNA building, and and they're cleaning up the railroad yards and all that kind of stuff that's showing there.
Kind of the East Bank is what I would call that.
Absolutely.
Where Schoenemann's used to be. It used to be a big lumber yard, and then they moved.
Yeah. Oh, there were a lot of lumber yards downtown Sioux Falls. Tuttle Lumber Company, Lunan Lumber Company. Oh, boy, I can't remember them all. Ross Lumber Company, that had a big fire over on the corner of 6th and Weber Avenue.
It takes lumber to build a town. So
they had to bring it in, too, because we've talked about that before. There were no trees in the area, so that was a big industry, the lumber industry.
So of the photos that we look at here, like this one, you said you've got an updated version of this. Have you had a chance to do that with quite a few of the photos where you'll take here's one from 1954, here's that same...
Well, in some cases, not a lot of them. I'd like to do that, before and after kind of a deal.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
I have some... of the intersection of 57th and Louise and so forth, we talked about earlier, where there's absolutely nothing around, railroad track. And there in September, I took a more updated photo of it, and it's all built with the Avera Hospital complex to the south of it. And you can't believe how much construction has taken part.
Are you still doing photography?
Photos? Yeah. Don't turn anybody down.
Now, how has your setup changed with the different technology? What you were using back in the 1950s, and I worked at the Huron Daily Plainsman as a photographer. I ran the darkroom, so you were talking about how when you were in high school, you got to leave class to go do photos. I got to do the same thing, so I can certainly relate. But I think it's interesting how that field has changed. And I remember while I was working at the newspaper, I got this magazine, and there was a big ad for this new digital camera. And that's what made me decide I need a different job. I can't do this because most of my hours, I couldn't work over 30 hours a week, and about 29 of those hours were in the darkroom.
Yeah.
And so how has your setup that you use changed? Has it changed at all, or you still use film? Or
I still use film. It's what they call medium format. It's a large negative.
Yeah.
And, the pictures that you're looking at in my book, other than the very most recent ones, were taken with a 4x5 black and white film speed graphic camera.
Okay.
And, boy, that thing was heavy to lug that around with you.
Yeah.
And I still have one that's operational. It uses flash bulbs. You can't buy flash bulbs. You can't buy film.
Oh, wow.
But I have the camera, so if anybody wants to know what the camera looked like that I took these pictures, I can show them. Not the same camera, but one like it.
Nice.
Well, that's part of the reason why these images are so crisp, is you use such a high-quality product.
Yes. I made a 6 by 8 foot enlargement of two of those pictures in the book. 6 by 8 foot. That's a pretty good-sized picture.
Yeah.
And the detail and resolution is as crisp as crisp can be.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference.
Oh, yes.
So we talked a little bit about the way you preserve these photos, but we didn't really get to dive into that. So what did you do differently? Because there are some, you look at the images you have, and I'm looking at the ones in the book, but I've also looked at these others in the sleeve. They look fantastic. Look like they were printed yesterday.
Well, of course, in the processing, if you do it properly, the pictures will last forever.
Yeah.
And don't put them up by the window or anything like that. Let the sun shine them on all day long. But the images, I worked in the darkroom too. I started from nothing. In my parents' basement, developing film, and so that the digital things have really transformed. I mean, people think I'm crazy still using film, but I enjoy it and know what I'm doing. So
if somebody wanted to order an image today, the process, they get a digital image and then they blow it up, or do you provide them the image and get it printed off for them? How do you do that?
Oh, I do. They tell me what picture they want, and I tell them how much they owe me, and I make the picture and deliver it to them with my hand out.
Awesome. And then they can frame it or do whatever they want.
That's theirs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that is fantastic. And all of the images that I'm seeing in this book, are all of these images available if I say, hey, I want this?
Every one of them. And I have more than
that. You
that.
never threw anything out. That's part of the reason that your catalog is so big, too.
Oh, I have a lot more pictures than what's in the book. I have some loose pictures. I have all kinds of pictures.
It's kind of fun. Every now and then, Bill and I will just go out for coffee, and he'll say, "Hey, guess what I found?" And he'll show it to me. And
yeah.
I mean, it's a very cool portfolio of the history of Sioux Falls that he's built.
Something that's been really neat about Our People, Our Story, the Sioux Falls Connected podcast, is every guest that we've had has had something, even though it's all the same community. It's all Sioux Falls.
Right.
But we talked with Myron Lee about kind of the musical history of Sioux Falls. Now we're visiting with you, and we're seeing the pictorial history of Sioux Falls. And, it's kind of hard to show that on a podcast, but certainly encourage people to look at the photos, and we'll tell you where you can see those. Everybody's got a different perspective from the same community, and every little piece of that pie tells a different story, but they all come together.
Well,
so some of the things that I'm seeing in these photos, I've heard them weaved through the other tales. We talked with Myron. He actually mentioned the theater that your family owned, the Egyptian. So really
9 cents, Myron said he would go down to get into the movie, and 5 cents for a bag of popcorn. So that was his
Watch
memory.
the cowboy movies.
Yes, Saturday. They were cereals.
Yeah.
Never see the end. They come back next Saturday and see the rest of them. They keep going. Keep you coming back.
It's a good idea.
Well, I think my whole motivation in having Bill on the show today is, first off, thanking him for coming to join us, because I said, hey, Bill, do you want to be on our podcast? What's a podcast?
Yeah.
I said, well, it's kind of like a radio show. We just tell your story of what you've taken with your pictures, and people get the opportunity to listen and hear about what you've done. Yeah, sure, that sounds great. Let's do it. So, Bill, thank you for joining us. And my hope is that, there's a lot of people like myself that, appreciate the work that you've done. And if there's an opportunity for you to connect with somebody and provide images for their business or for their home, I think that's a great thing that we can help you out with, and we're happy to do it.
I frequently get people that call me and say, well, I'm looking for a picture of such and such a thing. I wonder, somebody said you might have it. And a lot of times I do.
Nice. That's really cool.
So if the people, and as I mentioned earlier, I really enjoy showing it to groups of people, and because they can relate to it, and it's fun.
Yeah. Do you have you said this is the only book you have, so you don't have...
Yes, that's just samples so I can show it to people.
Yeah. Are there places people can go to see your work? I know that there are some businesses in town that have some of the photos.
Well, yeah, but I'd rather come to them, or they can come to me and show them my pictures. It takes about an hour to look at.
It's a fun hour to look through the entire thing. It's something I value. And if you got Bill's number, let's give that to everybody, and they can give him a call to set up a potential meeting.
And I'll throw this in the information for the podcast as well, but the cell phone number, 605-362-4134. And we'll put that in writing as well, so they can see that if
7 days a week.
Yeah.
I don't mind. I have the phone, just so I use it.
There you go.
Love it.
Well, and it's been an absolute pleasure visiting with you. It's been a lot of fun. Now, are there photos in here? Is there any one particular photo that you would say is your favorite? I know that's got to be like saying which is your favorite kid. That's tough to do. But is there a photo that when you look at it, you just go, man, I'm so glad I had a chance to push the button at that moment?
Though I mentioned the Queen Bee Mill fire was kind of exciting, but I also kind of like those pictures of the politicians.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, Joe Foss, that's another person that we'll talk about in an upcoming podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a creative and a colorful individual. And
I have this picture with the mayor of Sioux Falls, Fay Wheeldon, and then there was Joe Foss was governor, and Carl Munt was the United States senator, and Richard Nixon was vice president. All four people in the same picture.
Was that at the christening of the airport? Was that what that one was, or there was some event going on?
No, that was somebody who was running for office.
Well, he just coming through town.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Campaigning.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. And one of the other photos that we talked about before we went, because we were chatting before the podcast started, so some of it gets messed up in my mind, but I believe this is before we started recording. There was a photo where I saw cars double parked And,
Oh, yeah.
and you kind of shared a little bit about that. That was a really interesting image to see that. Cars parked along the sidewalk and then more cars parked along the street, but there's kind of a tale to tell about that.
Well, downtown, the car dealers were all on Dakota Avenue downtown between 9th and 10th Street on both sides of the street. If you want to buy a car, that's where you went. And there was some of them were off maybe around the corner someplace or another. But there's a fellow out here on South Minnesota Avenue had a gas station, and he had a sign out on the parking saying car washes such and such. And the city inspector told him that he couldn't have the sign out on the parking. So he called me up and he said, Bill, go on down there on Dakota Avenue where these car dealers got their cars parked on the sidewalk. Yeah. They're demonstrators. So you want to buy a car, you come down there and jump and take the keys and go right around the block. Cars are parked on the sidewalk and the street. But the city didn't care about that. So they were hollering about his car wash sign. He sent me down there to take a picture of the cars on the sidewalk, and that was the end of the contest.
Yeah, there were bigger fish to fry, and it's just, hey, check this out. These guys are doing a lot worse than I'm doing with my little A-frame sign.
Exactly.
So it's kind of fun. And that's basically the way your collection started. Was a business said, will you take a picture of my building? Will you take a picture of this? Will you take a picture of that? And before you know it, you had this portfolio built up, which, like I said earlier, I think it's a treasure of Sioux Falls history that is out there to be shared.
The big surprise is that I kept the film.
Yeah.
Why I did that? Because, after so long, you get tired of storing that stuff.
Are there any along the way that were lost that you kind of wish you hadn't lost, or have you not really lost them?
They weren't lost. I discarded them.
Okay.
Because I didn't think they were any value.
Okay. Any examples that stick out? Or is that
every once in a while somebody and I looking for something and I can't find it, and I know darn well that you only have so much room and something that nobody ordered from for 40 years.
Yeah.
Why keep? Well, then the guy all of a sudden decides he wants a picture.
Yeah.
And it's out in the city dump.
Oh, how
well,
sad is
we're
that?
glad you kept what you have, and like
Yeah.
I said, we thank you. It's kind of a cold day, but we appreciate that you came out, and I think people are going to really appreciate it. And we'll have, 8-10 examples on the Facebook page of some of the images that we talked about. But like I said, these pictures are there, and people appreciate them, and we're happy to share them.
And we're going to throw contact information for Mr. Pay, and I'll also put a link to the podcast, to the Facebook page in the description of the podcast as well. Bill, thank you again, sir.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Again, this is Our People, Our Story, a Sioux Falls Connected podcast for Mr. Bill Pay and also for Garrett Gross. I'm John Small from Sunny Radio. Thank you so much for listening.